Ah, that music gets me in the mood for Fridays. It is Friday, January 24th. Time is flying by and yet slowly creeping along because it's been crazy cold this week. I'm Heidi Hatch with KUTV 2 News. Thanks for being with us. Scott Howell in representing Democrats here in Utah today. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. Great
yes,
to be here.
And Jeff Stenquist here, also recently retired from the legislature, joining us for the Republicans today. So thank you.
Thank you.
It's fun getting new and different voices in here. So we have a lot to talk about, of course. We had the State of the State this week. The legislative session's gotten underway. We have a new president who has not wasted any time and has just gotten right to it. I'm going to leave the presidential stuff till last because there's so much to talk about what's happening here in Utah that I want to dig into first. And lost my notes here. So State of the State was last night, and Governor Cox, I think we've talked about before, he's a great orator. He tells great stories. He gets people to listen. He's always kind and funny, and people love listening to him. But I think there were also some people hoping that there would be some hard and some difficult issues he tackled. The question is, did he get to them? He did say that the whole goal and the idea for the state right now is we must build. He gave 5 different things he wanted to concentrate on going forward in the new year: housing attainability, 35,000 starter homes, energy abundance, which we're seeing at the legislative area as well, infrastructure and permitting reform, community safety and support. Jeff, when you look at his 5 areas of focus, would these be your 5 areas of focus, and did he hit the nail on the head?
I think definitely having housing affordability is a very key thing to have at the top of the list. So I'm glad to see that that was there. Energy independence, and that's an opportunity that the state of Utah has to be a leader in energy production and exports and so forth. One thing that I would note about that theme, and I really love the theme and agree that that's a great forum for Governor Cox. He gives great speeches. I love his State of the State addresses and other speeches that he gives. When it comes to building things and the theme of building, we have to remember that government and the state is not the one that actually does the building.
True.
It's the private sector that builds homes, that builds buildings, that all this infrastructure, and unless it's some public infrastructure like roads and freeways. But when we're talking about building a new power plant or things like that, that's the private sector that needs to do that. And so really what needs to happen is that the public sector needs to figure out how to enable that, how to reduce regulations, streamline things to allow those things to happen. So that's really the thing that we need to watch is what is the government now going to do to enable that economic prosperity and things to be able to be built? What are they going to do? As
a former legislator, is there something you see they can do? Because when I look at it, it all looks at pretty talk when you talk about that. Because like you said, the government's not going to go build $35,000 homes, nor are they just going to give them to you.
Right, and providing things like tax incentives. There's very little that you can do with taxpayer money to provide an incentive, for example. So one thing that I would hope that they would want to do is streamline regulation, reduce those barriers that there might exist to the private sector to build things. But at the same time, I see, for example, there's a bill in the legislature to put additional restrictions on and additional regulation on solar production. And people may like solar, you may not like solar, but putting additional regulations on something like that, perhaps in favor of, say, coal production, now you're picking winners and losers, and that's not a market-based solution. So those are the kind of things that I would hope that the Republicans would look at that and say, you know what, let's just let the free market decide on what types of energy production we want to see in the state and truly be a all of the above solution. Let's be open to everything, whether it be solar, coal, cleaner coal, and as well as nuclear and other options.
Scott, when you listened to those 5, did you feel the same way, or what stood out to you?
Well, in full disclosure, I work for developers, Garbett Homes I work for, and Peterson Development. And the regulations is what really holds up the process. And it's getting those permits and going through the entitlement process. I like what the governor said about they want 35,000 new ones. And as the representative said, getting that has to be a combination of cities, municipalities working with the state government. Like Jeff said, it has to be some incentive somewhere. Let the free market work. But I can tell you right now, we go through Hades when we try and get a project. People want, the neighbors want big half-acre lots. They don't want these small homes coming in. And they always refer to it as those people. We don't want those people out here.
And they were those people for whoever was there before them, right?
Those people are our children, and our grandchildren,
Yeah.
But I thought the governor, I love how he uses stories. And the story about the 5 children or boys that were killed in the war, I think when he read that the natural resources of the state could not handle any more, and then he said it was actually from 1935.
Yeah, that was interesting.
I thought that was great, because we have the technology to make things happen, and I welcome some nuclear. If it's safe, then I welcome it. And I think we just have to be concerned about where we're going to store the afterseeds of nuclear and what happens on that. I thought he did a great job on community safety and homeless initiatives. He's called out the mayor. He said, I want the plan, and I want to see what it is. And I can tell you right now, the plan's not going so well with elected officials up there on Capitol Hill.
And you've worked a lot in the homeless issue area for lots of years now. Have you looked over the mayor's proposal, and is there anything in it where you're saying, okay, there's light at the end of the tunnel, or is it just the same old thing that we've been seeing year after year?
Well, it's pretty much the same old thing year after year, and things that it's got a different frosting on top of the cake. And that's where really I think Mike Schultz, Stuart Adams, the governor, have all said enough's enough. And it wouldn't surprise me if we see public safety all of a sudden, and you know, municipalities and cities are just a contract with the state, that there might be something happening there. And I
Like
think
what we used to see when Highway Patrol was out
yes,
at, okay.
Operation Rio Grande was exactly, and Jeff was probably there when they dispatched them and gave them the authority to go in. And it was a working relationship, don't get me wrong. And I went out with the Highway Patrol. They treated those homeless people with so much dignity and respect. They made friends with them, but they enforced the law. And they gave them an opportunity to go to the Gail Miller Center or the Geraldine King, but you can't camp. You can't stay in Pioneer Park and continue to sell drugs and human trafficking. I'm telling you, that was horrible. So I think that might be something that the governor will enforce, and I think our mayor needs to be prepared of what's going to come down the pipeline.
It is that homelessness and public safety is such a complicated issue, because you can crack down on a specific area, but then are you just moving that to a different area. For example?
Yeah.
So it needs to be a comprehensive solution that addresses some of the root
And
issues.
Tyler Clancy has the most comprehensive bill I have ever seen in the legislature on this issue. And he's getting support from everyone. The service providers aren't too happy because it's calling for
A homeless issue bill?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a major bill. He's worked all year on it. He's calling for accountability. He wants a data metric of what did you do with that homeless person? Did you help get them into work? Did you help get them into addiction recovery? Did you help get them situated in a housing? And so that bill, I think, is going to pass, and that's going to be a new landmark.
Well, and he certainly knows what he's talking about. As a Provo police officer, Representative Clancy has firsthand knowledge of that.
He does, and he got promoted to detective, and he's detective over the sex crimes, and he will tell you stories about those crimes that happen with homeless people. It's amazing. And no one better is a subject matter expert.
Yeah.
You know, one other thing I loved about, and you guys aren't there yet, so you won't like this. I loved the governor saying, it's time to do away with the tax on Social Security.
Why do you think we've waited this long? Because he could have done it in his last 4 years. Governor Herbert could have done it. We're one of, 8 states that still has it. Why did we cling to that for so long?
I'd like to hear Jeff, because he was up there during this time, and they have to make specific tax cuts on property tax or income tax or whatever.
Yeah, and I've mentioned before that it's a topic that came up almost every year in the legislature, because really it is the legislature that makes that decision. The governor can apply pressure and all that, but really the legislature needs to decide where the budget's coming from and where the cuts are. And part of the problem is just balancing the budget and making sure that you have steady sources of revenue that come in. And so that's why things like getting rid of the sales tax on food or even Social Security, they sound really good, but those are very stable sources of income and revenue that don't fluctuate based on the economy like sales tax does. And so that's why those stable sources of revenue are really difficult for the legislature to give up, because then it puts them at risk in future years when the economy has a downturn of where those revenues
So
are gonna
Jeff,
come
you
from.
just coming fresh off the Hill, what do you think will happen? What's the appetite of your colleagues? I'd really be interested.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly hope that they do. I think that if they can tackle anything, I would rather see if a cut to income tax comes in, that they do focus on Social Security. I think that would be a good one, and maybe they'll do that if they go that route. But I don't know, because it has been a big push in the past, and there's been a lot of people advocating for that, especially when you have, for example, legislators from southern Utah where you have a lot of retirees.
Yeah, right.
That was a huge issue for those
On fixed
legislators.
incomes, yeah.
But it really comes down to the tax
Cool.
accountants and where they want to see that good tax policy.
Yeah, and whether they can work it out. I've had people asking me on social media, does this mean that it would get rid of all my taxes? And the answer to that is no. Essentially, what saved Social Security in the 80s in the Reagan administration when they got to the 11th hour was taxing Social Security. And unless they figure out some, I don't know, miracle, I don't know how you get rid of it on the federal level. If anything, they'll have to tax it higher or make people retire later or something to keep it around 10 years from now, since it's
Heidi,
not going to be solvent.
Tariffs. You're missing that. It's tariffs. That's the answer to everything.
Tariffs are the answer of anything. I know there's a
I'm just
lot of
kidding.
talks about tariffs, and I've been trying to read up on tariffs for Trump's sake, or all of our sake, so we know how it works. But yeah, everything has, a good and a bad that comes with it, and when they take that away from the state budget,
Right.
they have to make sure the money's there. So we'll be watching that closely. A few things that we've been talking about, the governor did, a nuclear-powered future. I actually listened to a meeting, I can't even remember if it was Eagle Mountain or Lehigh, somewhere in Utah County, where their city council actually had a very thoughtful debate this week during their city council, talking about whether they should clear the way for having one of the smaller nuclear sites. And while they're not on the list to get one anytime soon, they wanted to be ready for just in case that opportunity comes. It looks like the legislature's looking into that. They're looking at possible election changes. Teachers are watching HB 267. So I want to go through a few of those. Let's start with that one, since you oohed that one. I have to put this out here. You are lobbying for education right now, but teachers are watching HB 267 because this could end collective bargaining for public employees. UEA calls it a power grab. Jordan Tusher, who's fronting this bill, says this would instead allow employers to engage with people and negotiate contracts on an individual level. Do you see both sides of this?
I do. I think the representative makes a good point, but I also believe that there's some vindictiveness going on in that. And the hearing was yesterday, and it was brutal. I mean, one of my colleagues walked out of there and he said, "We just got our head handed to our, you know what?" And I think it's going to pass. I think unless the Senate does something on it. But it was a long, intense, and very contentious committee hearing yesterday.
Is there good that could come from individual teachers negotiating?
When I first got elected, I took the UEA on about that subject, and I think there's strength in numbers, and I think that there are teachers out there who are not even in AFT, and that's the American Federation of Teachers.
Yes.
So we have two of them here in Utah Education Association, the AFT. I think there's teachers out there who believe that they put in extra time when their colleagues go home at 3 o'clock on the clock. And you have some of these teachers who are really giving. Howard Stevenson and I ran a bill, and people say, "You and Howard got together?" I said, "Yeah, we did." And we wanted to provide compensation for those teachers who had a higher mark on getting more students into technology, getting more students into the next grade, increasing the ACT scores. And we tried to do that. And I can remember the UEA came to me and said, "Well, we can't do that because that's not fair to all the teachers." And I said, it's an incentive for all the teachers to do that. And we should be able to individually, and this goes to your point, would there be teachers individually that would fare from it? I think there would be. But this will be the bill of bills that you're going to see up there on the Capitol. And then that big cut to higher education, oh my goodness. And they go kind of hand in hand. This is specifically on removing the collective bargaining. But when you see what's happening to higher ed, it's going to be a really, really interesting year.
Do you look at it the same way or different viewpoint?
The thing that was a real eye-opener for me when up in the legislature when it comes to education. People can talk all day long that it's about the children. It's about money and who gets the money, period. And that's really what it is. And the legislature looks at the budget and they say education is one of the highest, one of the largest. I mean, next to social services, but that's a lot of federal money that comes in for that. So the amount of money that we spend, and yet they constantly get beat up about, well, but we're,
number 27th,
or whatever, And so it's like there's never going to be enough to satisfy everyone, and so it's now we have school vouchers. Now that was the nuclear option. That's now gone through, and so it's just a constant battle. And I think the legislature in the last few years really has started to just push really hard on education, because the same old story about, well, we need more money, just isn't having the same, it's not resonating like it used to.
And you said
it's just getting really old.
You said social services, and it's the same thing from the service providers. Just give us more money and we'll fix homelessness.
Right.
It'll be fixed tomorrow. Just give us more money.
We've burned a pile of money with homelessness and so many other issues, because we're starting again. I mean, we talked about homelessness already, but we spent millions and millions on those different homes for men and women and families, and now we're like, well, it's not working, and so we're going to go build another pile of money.
Community center.
Yeah. So, and hopefully they'll fix it. But yeah, throwing money at things doesn't always fix them.
And Heidi, let me give a big shout out to the Other Side Village. My goodness, we went out there. They had their grand opening 2 weeks ago, and they've got 30 homes built. And we were touring around, and we went up and went into one house. And this guy was from out in Draper, actually. This is interesting. And he's been living homeless for the last 15 years. We went in and talked to him about how it was to have his own place, and he just lit up. Now, remember, TOSA, they get some government money, but that is not their basis.
Yeah.
It's the dignity of work in their social movement, social enterprises, the donut shop, the moving company, the landscape company, the contractors. And I've used the contractors, by the way. They are unbelievably great. And so you're right. You're spot on. It's not just to keep, and so is Jeff, not to just keep throwing money at that. We've got to come up with better solutions.
All right, we'll be watching that one closely. Utah election changes are also on the table. There's been a lot of complaints coming out of especially the presidential, not primary, where it was a preference poll coming from both sides. Scott, do you see that we need changes to get more people involved, backing the system, or is Utah doing it right, where we're starting that grassroots effort, where we're doing the caucus convention system?
Heidi, you said it exactly. We're doing it right. We are. And the last audit, there were 5 ballots that they questioned, and 5 out of hundreds of thousands that were cast. We're doing it right. One of the bills that they have up there is you can't drop off your ballot anymore. You have to go into a place and show your ID. What's the problem they're fixing? When we only have 5 ballots that were in discussion of did they do it right? Is that really their signature? I think Utah sets the bar for the rest of the country. I really do.
I would agree with that, and I think making even something small like that makes it more inconvenient to vote. Let's make it safe and secure, but also as convenient as possible. And we do a really good job at that. I was reassured when I heard recently Senator McKell, who's what I understand is sort of spearheading elections in the Senate, was saying, hey, we don't need to do an overhaul. We can fix a few things at the margins, which the legislature's been doing over the years, fixing, making improvements, continuous improvement over time, but it doesn't need a major overhaul. We don't need to throw
Jeff makes a great point. The Senate is going to be the caretaker in this one. It will go over there. And some of his former colleagues and mine in the House, they're just a little bit far to the right, and they really question the elections. But reality, you can go ask anybody, election clerk. The guy in Utah County might be questionable, but you can ask almost anyone, and we have some of the safest, the most secure voting that we've ever done. And to be able to sit down as a family and go through the ballot and then make your decisions and then put it in the mail, it's like Jeff said, we don't want to steer more people away. We want to bring them in.
What about Phil Lyman and his backing he has right now in the state? He would like the caucus convention system to be the only way, the holy grail. No getting signatures. Count My Vote's been law here in Utah for 10 years. Do we need to stick with Count My Vote, or is there a time to listen and say, hey, maybe it's time to go all in with caucus convention, or get rid of it altogether?
That's a great question. Jeff, I'll let you go first, because
Ooh.
I'm processing this in my brain, because I know Phil.
Well, and certainly, I know Phil from when we were both elected
Yeah,
at
right.
the same year and served together all that time. But honestly, I think that it's time to really push for going to a primary system. I think the caucus convention system has really kind of run its course. And it's because the small number of people now that participate, they want to keep it small and exclusive. They want to be exclusionary, not inclusive, because it gives them that outweighed power. They get to have the power to themselves when they're the ones that get to stay there all the time. And they go to everything, and they want to spend all day on a Saturday at a convention. But that's not where the vast majority of Utahns are. And so, but I don't think that the legislature is necessarily going to go that route, and there may be some changes, and I think there's some offsetting bills going both directions on making it harder or more easy to gather signatures. I think they're going to kind of cancel each other out because the political incentives are there to sort of keep the status quo. I think it might take an initiative like Count My Vote to really make a fundamental change there.
And Jeff points out something really important, and I don't want your listeners to think this is only the Republican Party. It's the same in the Democrat. It's a small nucleus of people that have power that they really like. I'll never forget, after the convention, my good friend Derek Brown, who used to work for me, and he started in my office, called me, and he and his wife were out, and I'm probably giving too much information, out in the hot tub, and he said, I will never, ever do anything in this party again, or any party. I am so fed up. And he said, I don't know, he got like, what, 8% or something like that.
And then later he became the party chair.
And then, well, no, he became the AG. This is when he was.
This was after he was the
yes,
party chair.
Yes.
Okay.
And this is the guy who was the party chair.
Yeah.
And, I said, go take a deep breath, go drink your full strength Coke, whatever you want to do. Just go
wild.
Yeah, go wild. And look, the guy's the AG. And he's probably, I will predict right now, he'll be the finest Attorney General, equal to or even greater than Jan Graham, because his moral compass will not waver. I was on the transition team, and my eyes were open to so many things up there. But if Derek, and if he hadn't decided to come back around, we would have had Frank, whatever his name is, and these other two guys, who really are kind of way out there. So I think that's a good example of what happens with the caucus system.
So you really think there is some change in the AG's office? We've talked about this the
Oh,
last
my
couple of
goodness.
weeks, but I mean, we've had 3 Republicans in a row where it seems like decades now of problems and questions of whether or not they're using that office properly. And so the question is, are we going to change, or is it business as usual?
Well, as part of the transition team, I guess I can talk about this. Our recommendation was to clean out the whole house, and they pretty much did. And the new people that Derek has brought in, Stuart Young from the U.S. Attorney's Office, criminal prosecutor, great guy. And I think Derek is surrounding his people with those people that have the same values as he has, and I truly believe that he will be one of the greatest attorney generals.
I agree with it. I think Derek's the right person for that job right now, and I think he's really going to turn.
And you worked with him, right? Were you going down when he was in the House?
I was not there when he was in the
okay.
House, but I've worked with him certainly in other
In the
capacities. Yeah, for sure.
It's always good when you can get thumbs up from both sides of the aisle when you're heading into office, so good news for them. I wanted to talk about a bill that I had no idea existed. It may not even actually be published yet, but you are up at the Capitol and keeping an eye on bills. You said that Ballard, Representative Ballard, has a bill that deals with polygamy. I was looking through all of her things to figure out what bill this was, but I could not find it. So tell us what it is, and can we expect it actually going through fruition and seeing it online for votes?
Polygamy is a tricky thing. I did a lot of bills on polygamy when I was up there. And it brings out a lot of people from a religious perspective that you don't even think about. my good friend Mike Levitt, I had a pretty tough bill on polygamy, and I went down in the office, and he kind of put his arm around me and said, well, you know, Scott, the Levitts come from a great tradition of polygamy, and I'm not sure that that's probably something that I'll be able to support you on. But I think as time has gone on, we've seen the challenges of polygamy. It's not a religious freedom. It's also in our Constitution. It says that there will be no plural marriages or no polygamy, but it respects freedom of religion. It's right there in our Constitution. The bill that Representative Ballard is putting forward is there to help protect children who are in these polygamy relationships. We often think of the women, but this one is really focused on the children, about having the right birth certificate, being able to know that they're in the right age. I passed a bill that said you couldn't get married under the age of 16 unless you had the right documentation and you'd gone through these classes. And no one has been ever prosecuted under that bill. So I think you'll see some flavors of that bill brought into this, what's called organized crime amendments, and looking as a crime.
I don't think a lot of people probably know a lot about some of the polygamous communities. We think about the ones that are living maybe in the southern part of the state, and they have compounds, and there wasn't really a lot of getting out and away from home. You didn't watch television until a few years ago. You didn't have cell phones. You really just lived in this bubble where you just didn't know any differently, and we knew that children were being abused, and there were all kinds of bad things going on, but there was very little control, and there weren't people leaving to know any better. Why is this coming up now? There are larger, do you call them clans, groups up in the Salt Lake County area. We have the Kingstons, there's others around the state. What's pushing this bill forward? Is there anything specific?
I think it's just now we know that some women have broken out of polygamy, and they have pretty detailed records and information. I don't think I want to say much more than that because their lives are at stake. I mean, I said this earlier to you and Jeff. The Kingstons make the mafia look like a primary class. I'm not kidding you. And when you see deep underneath of what's been going on, it's sad. It's a sad commentary. And when you talk about these women, I had 3 that broke out, came to my office. They wouldn't leave the office until I found a place for them. The LDS Church offered up apartments for them. It was great. We went through helping them to reconnect with society. And the one woman said to me, I said, and I was kind of upset at him at one time, and I said, this is kind of your fault because you were there. And she said, oh, that's so unfair. You sent her to hell. That is so unfair. And I said, why? And she said, how would you like to be brought up that your main objective in life is to have children and please your man? And then she said to me, all of us, most of the women get pulled out of 5th grade, and then they go in to learn homemaking skills and all these other things. She said, how would you feel if your man kept saying, you can't drive, and then you find out that you can get a driver's license at 16? She said, literally, they told me when I could drive and what I should do, and so I had a different perspective on it.
And you don't really think about that, I guess, when you're up in Salt Lake County or some of these urban areas instead of southern Utah, because you're thinking, okay, well, they can lead normal lives. They're obviously making this choice, and if that's what their grown-up self wants to do, fine. But you forget that there's rules within 4 walls of a home when you live in there, and every family has different rules, and you live by those rules, and that's the world they lived in, so it's different. Do you see this making any headway? You've been in the legislature recently. I think 2020 was the last time I saw some bills from polygamy really get some root and get conversation going.
Well, I haven't seen the specifics of this bill. It's not public yet, to my knowledge.
Right.
But certainly, I think that the state has a role to, first and foremost, enforce the law. If there are groups, regardless of whatever religious, denomination they have or whatever, if they're in an organized way skirting the law. And certainly, we have some privacy within the walls of our own home, but the state does have a responsibility to protect children, when there's abuse or other things happening. And so absolutely there needs to be some scrutiny on that. And if anything can be done, we ought to be looking at it and doing it.
Let me give you another perspective on this. Back 20 years ago, when I was up there, there was also some concern about the LDS Church. I don't think they wanted to have it exposed or brought up, because at that time it was something that kept hurting them, worldwide,
Yeah.
so on and so forth. Times have changed. Look at what we're sharing now from a historical perspective. And I think if someone had said to me, oh, that bill never passed because the church will squash it, I don't believe that. I think when it's about children and it's about freedom and it's about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that I think they would probably be in favor of. I'm not sure they're far enough along to come out and say we're going to support this bill, but I don't think they would squish it, because the church has matured too over the years. This is a very liberal church that believes in progress and divine revelation and change and things like that. And I use that
small L liberal in terms of.
I use that. Yeah, I use that in the sense of what the word really means, not what we put the connotation on it.
Yeah, sunlight is definitely the best disinfectant, and I think that we've seen a lot of that over the years. I'll be interested to see as that one moves forward. Anything else that you are seeing that's moving or your friends are talking about that you're like, ooh, this is what we need to pay attention to?
At this point, we're only in the first week of the session, and so there are lots of ideas out there. And just one thing that I would say is, just because some bill gets proposed or some idea out there, it's certainly not a done deal. You have to kind of look at who's behind it and does this thing really have legs. We'll see what actually starts advancing through the legislature, because it's a gauntlet. And bills can get killed
That's right.
at any point.
Yeah.
So I got some breaking news.
Ooh, I'll take breaking news. Let's do it.
$500,000 for a spaceports study.
Oh, we actually did a story about that. Are we actually going to do
And that
that?
one was proposed by Senator Stevenson, who's the appropriations chair in the Senate. So that
The
one.
representative nailed it.
So now you know that
It's going to get funded.
yeah.
Which is kind of crazy, and I get that. You have to be forward-thinking and ready if you want to, but we have probably states like Florida or Texas or Georgia who are built and ready to go if people want to start going on, vacations to the outer edges of space or just get to space. Is this a good use of our money? Are we headed in that direction?
Heidi, think about it's not Thiokol. What's the place?
Well,
Hercules.
Well,
Is it
there's
still
Thiokol and Hercules, of course.
We do make a lot of parts for spaceships here.
Well, and we launched a few rockets up there.
Yeah.
They go through that stage one. I think that, again, is the visionary of what the governor was talking about. We got to have the vision. And when I saw that, I thought, good for them. Technology-wise, helping students at, Utah State is one of the finest things.
Aerospace engineering is big there, yeah.
And they had the only professor that went up in space, and he taught up there for a long time. So I'm kind of excited about it. It reminds me of the internet coming in. Everybody said, we'll just keep sending messages the old way and all that. But like the representative said, if you're the appropriations chair and you put in $500,000, you're going to get $500,000.
All right, so and that's really what you have to pay attention to, because you're seeing a lot of bills proposed by people that maybe you're new and they're just throwing out ideas.
Yeah.
They're probably not the ones who are getting the traction. They may be sexy when they're talking about them, but that one will be interesting to see. So I'd like to be on one of those flights. So we'll see how that
Join the
works out.
club.
What year would be? I'm still waiting for that portion of the Jetsons to follow through, where we can just fly into work and not deal with I-15. So I'll hold my breath a little longer. Trump's first week has been a banner week. It's not quite over yet. The inauguration went from outside to inside. We've seen illegal immigrant ICE arrests underway across the country. We've had at least one here in Utah. A gentleman, I don't know if you should call him a gentleman, an illegal immigrant who was charged with sex crimes that is now on a detainer in Salt Lake County's jail. A judge has temporarily blocked Trump's birthright citizenship executive order. He's got a lot of executive orders. He signed an order to release the JFK, RFK, and MLK assassination files. Those could be possibly another month before we get those. Jeff, you first on this one. Has there been anything where you were really excited, where you're like, okay, he hit the nail on the head, I like this, or that you were like, why are we doing this in our first week?
There was a lot of things that were I think were good, and even ones that were controversial, like pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accords. That one I think everybody understands that does make some sense. Things like that. some of the things that he did with, trying to focus on getting rid of DEI positions and things like that in the government. If, there's different...
So you like the DEI getting rid of?
If he wants to be focused on merit-based promotions and positions, then I think that's great. Let's focus on promoting people based on their merits, and not some other intangible factor or immutable factor. So, certainly things that fall within the bucket of, hey, this is an executive branch function, and he's now the leader of the executive branch. We're going to change this and do things differently within the executive branch. That's great. When I start to get uncomfortable is when, hey, we're doing something that maybe is outside the legislative branch or outside the executive branch. We're stepping now on legislative functions, on other things. I was really disappointed in the what he did, reversing the TikTok ban and what he said there, because this is something that went through a proper legislative process, and there was nothing in the law that's
nonpartisan too.
And has the blessing of the courts, and so for him to step in, and you wonder, and there's questions about, well, were there donors or other wealthy influence? That one's disappointing to me for sure, as well as I think one of the biggest ones, which I think is a real stain on his presidency, is just giving immunity to all the January 6th
Did you see that
protesters.
there should have been some that were released, or did you disagree with all of them being released?
Well, I think that if they wanted to take a nuanced approach, and you heard some of this talk from others, like J.D. Vance and others saying, well, we're going to look at ones that maybe there was some overreach in terms of prosecutorial, overreach, and people were, maybe there was some unfairness in some of those trials. Maybe there were some sentences that were overly harsh. That's fine, but we're not going to, they were saying things like, we're not going to pardon someone who blatantly assaulted a police officer, and yet they just gave that, they didn't do it that way. There was no nuance. It was just, we're going to give blanket immunity, even to people who clearly, assaulting police officers should be something that is not okay, period. And just because you were doing it in the name of President Trump should not excuse any of that behavior.
Yeah, and there was one here in Utah, I think his name's John Sullivan. He went by other aliases, but he was, I think, anti-Trump, had been kind of rabble-rousing and just kind of getting people going before the event, was there on the day of, was wearing Trump gear, went in with people who broke the window, was videotaping and claiming he was there as a journalist, but he was kind of inciting some of that happening. He, I think, has been in jail for a couple years now, was released or will be released. Your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are, I watched the whole inauguration. I still love the pomp and ceremony. I still believe in America.
And the fashion's fun too, isn't it?
Oh, the fashion is great.
A lot of people talking about Melania's
Yeah.
outfits, yes, for sure.
And I watched it on C-SPAN, so I don't have a talking head that's talking to me the whole time. And I was impressed with how President Biden, Vice President Harris were so calm when the president spoke. He took some real pot shots at them.
With him sitting right there, I mean, it was
Right
not...
there.
And it was close inside. Instead of being outside where there was a little space, everything was
Right.
very intense.
Close. And I respect them for not making any faces, not doing obscene gestures or anything, and that's just classy people. And they
George W. was making the faces.
Yeah.
He
Oh,
always-
did you see that?
He always makes
my
faces.
goodness, he cracks me up. And C-SPAN covers it so well. I mean, they've got cameras all over. Yeah, there are some good things that I think he did. 72 proclamations right out of the chute. I've thought a lot about DEI, and it always feels like it's the other population, the non-white population that are getting all of these things. And it made me think, I should be able to talk about my LDS faith in any time, place, anywhere. And I never saw DEI coming out to say, you can't talk about being LDS. And it's kind of been taboo for all of us, is to be careful in our jobs and in our social settings that we don't say that. But DEI went so far out there I'm glad that he did away with that.
Yeah, it seems like it's a correction from that. Speaking of that, usually when you see things happen on a presidential level, there's trickle down to the states
Yes.
sometimes. And because of federalism, states can make their own decisions. But it was interesting this week after that DEI executive order, Governor Cox specifically tweeted and said, "I've been asked recently about whether the state of Utah has a DEI advisor." He said, "The answer is simple, we do not. Last year, I advocated and signed into law House Bill 261, which prohibits discriminatory practices based on race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religion," and said that he even had the support of one of his advisors on this. That advisor he mentioned, his director for Utah Division of Multicultural Affairs, when you look at her job,
Yes.
it looks at the very basis of it is
Yes.
it's a DEI job. So why do you think he came out and said, "I don't have a director of DEI," when you really read what she does, and he may give it a different name, but I mean, it seems like DEI. So why not own it if he's got it, or what do you think about
Remember,
this?
politicians have a constituency, and sometimes it's far on the right, and sometimes you say some things to keep the constituency happy. And I think on that one that this woman does the same, and I forgot who it is. She does she administers.
Nubia Pena.
Yeah, Pena. Yeah, Pena. And so I think he was just reassuring his audience and probably the president.
I don't think it worked though, because he got community noted, and people looked up her salary and saw
He
that she
did.
started at 50,000. Now she's at like 220, which is a pretty
Yeah,
solid pay
sure.
increase over
Oh,
4
yeah.
years.
I mean, it really is. One thing that I thought was really interesting is on the birthright. Clearly, nobody in the Trump administration understands constitutional law.
Apparently not.
Yeah, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I understand the 14th Amendment, which if you want to change that birthright, you've got to go through the process. You're going to have to go to every state, vote this way, and then you go through the whole
You
process.
cannot change
Yeah.
the Constitution.
No, you
every single
can't.
order. I mean, this is not how this country works.
It's like the ERA that President Biden on his way
yeah,
out
yeah.
said that was part of the
Oh, yeah,
Constitution. I was like, are you sure about that?
And it was interesting the comparison in the final days of the Biden administration,
Yeah.
where he makes this proclamation about the ERA,
Yeah.
and then he grants blanket pardons to his family members and all sorts of people, and then within days, the next day you've got Trump doing similar things on the other side, and it was really unfortunate, and it was like whiplash that we were getting.
Yeah.
I know, it has been a flurry of everything because Biden really went all out on his way out. And a lot of times you see presidents go more quietly and they say their goodbyes, but they're not, signing off as many pardons as he did and doing what he did. And now we're seeing the exact flip side of it. And so being on social media right now is, it's exhausting because the whole nation's going through some whiplash right now.
And
Yeah.
I think some of that, Heidi, was tit for tat.
Yeah.
He didn't know that Biden had pardoned all of his family and all that
Yeah.
at the time. And if
We
you-
got word of that, I think 4 minutes before they
Minutes
started
before,
the
yeah.
inauguration, yeah.
And I think he probably got upset, and that's why he pardoned all of the J6 people.
Which I think there was probably a real risk of some revenge against them, and so that was probably justified.
And I'm fine with that. And I heard the president say the other day, well, Biden is so dumb he didn't pardon himself. No, the Supreme Court ruled that you have immunity as a president, and if anybody should know that, he should,
Right.
Yeah.
because that happened under his watch, and so I think it was really a little bit interesting. I'll give a big shout out on one thing. Representative Kelly Atkinson, who served many years up at the state legislature, a great guy. Every year he ran a proclamation that urging the federal government to open up all the files for JFK, MLK, and RFK. And I used to think, here we go again, it's not going to work. But I am glad that the president wants those files open. What is there in there? Is it the FBI? Did Lee Harvey Oswald not really exist? I mean, what is it? So I was very happy that he did that. I think we all have as you said, transparency, Jeff.
Yeah, and enough time has passed.
Yeah.
That, let's.
Yeah,
let's
and I
see
think
that.
a lot of people are like, why is he doing this? This is just a distraction. But I think that it comes down to the heart of that transparency, and sunlight's the best disinfectant. And if we want to get back to trusting our institutions and our government, I think laying it all on the table so people can see it, and then, get the wild conspiracies out of the way. I think it's easier to build back trust when you're not trying to hide things and say, oh, you can't see this, It just feels like bad parenting at some point. So I'll be interested to see what that happens. A lot of people are like, why didn't he release Epstein files?
Yeah.
That to me seems like maybe it's because it's more recent. And I mean,
Yeah.
all three of the MLK, JFK, RFK were from the 60s. So anyone involved in the investigations, everything's either long out of the service or
they're
dead.
dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And
So
I'm probably one of them, so.
you're one of the dinosaurs. I think we're all growing up way too fast. It's so silly. Well, so much great stuff to talk about. Before we let you go, each of you, is there anything you're wanting everyone to keep their eye on? Keep the eye on the ball as we're moving forward with the president of the legislative session.
Well, go ahead, Jeff.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
I know I'm picking on you to make things up as you leave here.
No. Well, first of all, to all the Democrats who are so down and everything, don't be down. Just bounce back. This is life. This happens. This is like when your son or daughter gets in trouble and you think, oh, everybody knows, and we're going to be. I can't move on. Just embrace it, and we know how to change things. And the great thing about our democracy, we'll have 48 months, 4 years to be able to make a change if that's what you want to do, and get involved. Go out and get involved. I don't think we should be rock throwers all the time. I think the fourth branch of the government, as I've always said, is you, Heidi. It is you. It is the press, and it's journalists. And they're doing your job and getting the facts and seeing the light of day, letting that sunshine come through. You've said that a few times, and I love that, because that's the transparency that we need. I think the other thing that we have to realize is this country voted for President Trump, that he won the popular vote.
Yeah.
And won it by pretty big margins. And I was Kamala's surrogate, and I knew we flew back to Atlanta and we worked down there, and then we drove over to Beaufort, South Carolina, and I knew we were in trouble when I went to our old neighborhood and I saw Trump signs with no Harris signs with the local Congress people. I went to Jim Claiborne's district in South Carolina, and there would be a Trump sign and a Claiborne. And I think on her behalf, she didn't have full time to run a campaign. I'm not going to make excuses, but she did a heck of a job trying to do the best she could. And she didn't really focus on the blue collar workers who have been the Democratic sole bread and butter. And they believed President Trump that they would have a chance at moving forward. And we didn't talk about the economy. We didn't talk about jobs. We didn't talk about the border. And you don't have to talk about it to say we're going to send everybody out. You have to talk about it to say we have to have common sense. And so it didn't surprise me that we lost. And you know what? Every day I've lost elections, and you just get back up and you go out and you do what you should do. Throwing rocks is not an answer to when you lose elections.
Yeah. When you lose, it's a good time to learn lessons and
yes,
look at what happened. Yeah.
And those lessons that the Democratic Party is now having to do some deep soul searching, and maybe they'll realize that, hey, they were taken over by some of the extreme parts of their party. And I hope that the Republicans don't fall into that same trap, because if the election had gone the other way, the Republican Party would be having to do that same type of soul searching. Now, I think that people did vote for President Trump and were able to maybe set aside some of his quirks, his maybe personality that maybe they didn't like, because they feel it in the economy and their personal lives, and they see some of these and they were turned off by some of the more extreme positions of the Democrat Party. But now, when you look at some of so while they were able to excuse some of these things, like what President Trump did with January 6th, I think that could be a real stain on his presidency. But the real inoculation that he has against that is success. If he's successful in making the country, our economy strong and all of these things, then people will be willing to excuse some of that behavior or some of those bad decisions. If not, then there will be a similar backlash, I think, against the Republicans.
And no matter who the president is, I am the kind of person that wants, hopefully we're all like this, you want your president to be successful because their success is your success. And so hopefully we'll see some of that. I mean, obviously there's going to be success, there's going to be failures. Just looking at the first week, there's been a whole lot of Trump talking when sometimes you're like, whoa, somebody put him on mute. But what I do like is that he's been taking questions from the media, he's been answering questions, and I like that openness and having the ability to ask and hold accountable. So hopefully we continue with that as we move forward. Thank you, both of you, for being part of the conversation today.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
It's been
Thank
great to
you.
be with the representative.
And we will be back next week. If you've been missing Greg Hughes, he will be back here to fight with Mara, and hopefully we'll get both of you back in here too, because they'll be taking vacations
He's
as well.
on release, right? From
He is
jail.
work release or
Yeah,
something
he's got
like
work
that.
When he gets back on his rehab,
Yes.
We
We'll
wish
imagine
him the
whatever
best.
we want. Well, thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend, everyone.
Thank you so much.